I was just thinking about some things, and it occurred to me that only men have God-given rights. Actually, I believe that's a fact. Only men have God-given rights, and they only have God-given rights so far as they are willing to defend them, more or less. How far they're willing to go to defend them. And then women, their rights, they're not God given. They're because they cannot personally defend their own rights. They can't personally, through their own devices, other than persuading other men. So any rights that women have are solely given by men. And that inherently makes men superior automatically because I was thinking what brought me up, what made me think about this is how feminists always say women couldn't own property. And I don't know why, but I was just mulling that over, and I was thinking, well, that makes absolute sense that women wouldn't have or wouldn't be able to own property because women could not enforce their own ownership of that property. If a woman owns something or says she owns something, it reminds me of the Bible or the Ten Commandments. If you've ever, I mean, if you've never read the Bible, but you've seen the Ten Commandments, there's a scene where Moses meets his wife, but she's trying to water her goats or her sheep, and then some other tribe pushes their way through and knocks the girl and her sisters out of the way to water their goats first. And then Moses springs into action and actually defeats like three or four different guys and forces them back, let he who has drawn the water, uh, you know, waters his animals first. Anyway, but the women had drawn the water, but and those men even said when they were like, but this is our father's well. It even has his sign, and they said, well, let him have sons guard his. Let him have sons to guard his well. Basically saying tough luck. He doesn't have sons to guard it, and you're just gonna have to wait your turn, sweetheart. And then Moses intervened, but that kind of proves the fact that women are at the mercy of men. Maybe not in modern society. They're definitely not at the mercy of men in the wilderness because then you have animals and stuff to worry about. But even even in somewhat uh, organized societies, they're subordinates. Um, and they're seen as such because uh, and honestly, I think women owning property was strictly something for people who had property, which is automatically you're talking about the one percenters of history that had assets to pass to their kids. And the only reason why women, needed to own property is in case somebody had an inheritance but no son to will it to bequeath it to. So I think they would give it to a daughter um, in lieu. Same thing with like Queen Elizabeth, Queen Victoria. There's no other rightful male heir. No other male. There's no male with a rightful claim to the crown, so it defaults to a female at that point to keep it in the family. And that's exact. Queen Elizabeth was the Virgin Queen, famously never married, and Queen Victoria, her husband was never the king. He was basically the queen or king consort. Same as Princess Camilla now. She's the queen consort. But it's like women are placeholders when it comes to inheritance, uh, and 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 rightfully so. Rightfully so, because and back 200-300 years ago, when a woman had property and a husband and a man married that woman, it remained her property, but it was his responsibility to upkeep and maintain that property and to develop that property. So when he, it was a burden to him. It wasn't something he owned, but it was something that fell under his jurisdiction, that fell under his purview when it came to the responsibilities that were divvied up in the marriage. The responsibility to take care of her inheritance is on him, is on the husband. And I mean, of course, you had assholes that squandered their wives' fortune, but a lot of guys, that they saw it as their own kids' fortune anyway, so they would just lump it in with their fortune, and a lot of times it was a dowry, of course, it was a dowry, and then also, it's just kind of weird how things work, and how they worked in the past. That a man, he was responsible for not only the woman, the kids, her finances, her inheritance or her property, as well as his own property, and then and then it goes to his kid, his son, obviously, or then it just kind of gets held over until there is a male heir, more or less. Because the women, they never actually are able, they never actually have control of their property. Their husband does, but it's not his to bequeath. So really, he never owns it. It honestly, it does stay in the woman's family. It does stay in her lineage, because he can't sell it. He can't sell. I don't think a man could sell a woman's. It's definitely not without their permission. Like in the 1800s, all they could do was service the property, or maybe collect the payments for the property, but they couldn't sell it. Um, that was the woman's, her family lineage property. And that rightfully, it because it skips the woman, and the husband's merely like a care. I think the husband was merely a caretaker for when the son, the next male heir, can take a hold of it. Anyway, it really kind of lays bare the fact that because of the natural way of things, because of the way God made them, women are the weaker vessel. Women, their rights are their man-given rights. Only men have God-given rights, and it's such hogwash. All the stuff that they've been trying to shove down people's throats for years now. That somehow this isn't the case, when it clearly is the case that women, to no fault of their own. It's not saying anything bad. They're just not men. They can't. They don't have men have a monopoly on force, and it is what it is. It is what it is. And luckily we have a good enough society that loves and cherishes our women and doesn't treat them like chattel, like they do in these backward countries. We have always, in the West, given our women a long leash. We have always allowed them to have much more of a life, a personality, and a opinion, as well as authority. We've allowed them to have much more of that than in many other societies. Much more. but it's all backed up with by men. You know, I think that's why there can't be a matriarchy, because a matriarchy they would just scatter them like a flock of chickens. You know, the first tribal band of men, of brigands, would, as soon as they saw a village of women, they would just scatter them like chickens, scatter them to the wind. They would burn all of their huts down. They would chase them all off. You know, they'd be on. I mean, it's like, that's why there's never been a matriarchy, and there never will be a matriarchy. Because why would men subject themselves to that? They could just take everything. Why would they subject themselves to the women when they could, you know, what are the women holding over them? You know, like access to their bodies, because the men could just take that. You know, there's nothing that women hold over men that men can't just take. So that's why a patriarchy will never work. I mean, truly, it can never, and it will never work. Thankfully so. And it's funny that scholars haven't didn't come to this conclusion. Like, I've never heard a scholar say that matriarchies wouldn't work, because why would men subject themselves to a system that they don't run? Why would they do that? That doesn't make any sense.